Hi everyone, thank you so much for stopping by my channel. Here, I love sharing stories, useful knowledge, and personal experiences that can hopefully bring value to your day. I truly appreciate your support, so if you enjoy the content, consider subscribing and being part of this growing community.
Had been married for 11 years when I finally stopped believing my own excuses. My name is Michael, and for most of my adult life, I was the kind of man who showed up. I showed up to work, showed up to family dinners, showed up to my marriage every single day, even when the other person stopped meeting me halfway. I'm a software engineer, spent the better part of my career building systems that catch errors before they become disasters. Funny how blind a man can be to the bugs running right inside his own home. My wife and I met at a mutual friend's cookout on a Saturday afternoon in late August. She was standing near the back fence with a glass of lemonade, laughing at something someone had said, and the sound of it hit me like a song I'd forgotten I knew. Her name was Diana. She had this way of making every room feel smaller, more intimate, like she pulled the walls in just enough so that you felt like you were the only person she was talking to. I asked her to dinner 3 days later. We got married 2 years after that. For a long time, we were genuinely happy. She worked in real estate, had a real talent for it, and I worked remotely from our home office. We bought a house in a quiet suburb of Charlotte. We talked about kids for a while, but Diana said she had a hormone condition that made conception difficult and risky. I told her it didn't matter, that we were enough. She cried when I said that, and I thought those were tears of relief. I didn't know then what I know now about why she was really relieved. The changes didn't happen overnight. That's the thing nobody tells you about a marriage falling apart. It doesn't shatter, it erodes. One day she started staying late at the office. Then late turned into very late. Then very late became occasional overnight stays because of out-of-town clients. She stopped asking me about my projects. She stopped sitting next to me on the couch. She'd come home, change clothes, eat alone in the kitchen while scrolling her phone, and drift off to bed before I came upstairs. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself big deals were closing. I told myself a lot of things. The first crack I couldn't plaster over happened on a Tuesday. My old college friend Scott called me out of nowhere. Said he wanted to grab lunch. Nothing unusual about that. But when I showed up at the restaurant, he already had a beer in front of him, and he wasn't smiling. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to not shoot the messenger." He'd been at a hotel bar in uptown Charlotte 2 nights before, waiting for a client of his own. He saw Diana. She was sitting in a corner booth with a man Scott didn't recognize, and the way they were sitting, her hand on his forearm, leaning in close enough that their faces were inches apart, was not the posture of a business meeting. Scott had taken a photo. He slid his phone across the table. The man in the photo was in his mid-40s, well-dressed, tan, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having been told no. I didn't know who he was yet, but I knew the way my wife was looking at him, and I knew I had never once in the last 2 years seen her look at me that way. I drove home in a kind of controlled stillness. Diana was there when I got back, standing in the kitchen in her work clothes, asking me casually if I wanted pasta for dinner. I said sure. I watched her move around the kitchen, and I thought about the photo, and I said absolutely nothing. Not because I was a coward, because I had worked with systems long enough to know that when you suspect a breach, you don't alert the system, you quietly start logging. I called a private investigator the next morning. His name was Dennis, a retired cop who worked out of a small office near the airport. I explained the situation. He listened without reacting, like a man who had heard every version of this story already. He gave me a small, voice-activated recorder and told me to place it under the driver's seat of Diana's car. He said he'd have his people start making observations within 48 hours. That evening, I slipped the recorder under her seat while she was in the shower. I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't even anger. It was grief, plain and quiet. The kind that settles into your chest before you've fully accepted what it's grief for. 2 days later, Diana left for what she called an all-day property showing in Concord. I retrieved the recorder from her car after she pulled out of the driveway and drove around the block. I sat in a parking lot of a grocery store and pressed play. 15 minutes into the recording, her phone rang through the Bluetooth. A man's voice filled the speakers, warm and familiar in a way that made my jaw tighten. "Hey, beautiful. You on your way?" 20 minutes, she said. "Did you get the room?" "Same as last time," the man said. "3rd floor." There was a pause, and then she laughed, that same laugh that had stopped me at a cookout 11 years ago, and she said, "I've been thinking about you all week." "Yeah?" he said. "Ditto. Hey, what's Michael doing this weekend?" You sure he won't come looking? Michael? She said my name like it was a punchline. He's probably debugging some server somewhere. He won't even notice I'm gone. He never does. I stopped the recording. I didn't go back inside the grocery store. I sat there for a long time. Then I drove to Dennis's office and handed him the recorder and asked him to pull everything off it. By the end of the afternoon, I had a name, Ryan. Diana's regional manager at the realty firm. The same firm she'd worked at for the past 4 years. I asked Dennis to dig deeper, and I asked him to be thorough. What I did not do was go home and act like everything was normal. I did not sit next to my wife at dinner and wonder if I was misreading something. I was done misreading. I slept in the guest room that night and told her I had a migraine. She did not to check on me. Over the next week, Dennis was thorough. He tracked their movements, documented 3 separate meetings at 2 different hotels, and compiled photographs along with GPS records. Meanwhile, I started looking more carefully at our finances. Diana and I had always kept mostly separate accounts. She handled her own income, I handled mine, and we split household expenses. I had never questioned it because I trusted her. But now I pulled every statement I could access. What I found took the floor out from under me. Diana had a personal savings account I knew about, but connected to it was a second account at a different bank that I had never seen. Over 3 years, she had quietly transferred just over $240,000 into it. Commissions, bonuses, proceeds from deals she'd told me were modest. All of it funneled somewhere I was never supposed to see. I kept pulling the thread, using her laptop one afternoon while she was out. The password was still the one she'd given me years ago for a streaming account, and people rarely change what they don't think you'll look for. I found a folder in her email address. Not sent. Drafts. She and Ryan had been using draft emails as a dead drop, saving messages back and forth without ever transmitting them. It's an old trick. The emails went back 18 months. I read them slowly, all the way through. The early ones were cautious, excited in the way of 2 people who know they're doing something wrong and can't stop. The later ones were practical. There were receipts forwarded between them, confirmation emails for hotel bookings. One email where Ryan wrote that his wife had been asking questions, and he needed to be more careful for a while. Diana's reply, same. Michael's been a little clingy lately. I'll manage it. Clingy. I had asked her twice if everything was okay between us. Then I found an email from 8 months ago that I had to read 3 times to fully absorb. Ryan had written simply, "Did you handle the situation?" Diana replied, "Yes. Clinic on Tuesday. Took care of it. Don't worry." Ryan's next message, "You're sure it wasn't mine?" Diana, "Does it matter? It's handled." I closed the laptop and sat very still. I thought about the night, 8 months ago, when Diana had come home quiet and pale and told me she had a bad stomach virus. I had brought her tea and asked if she wanted me to call her doctor. She said no, she just needed to rest. I had sat outside the bedroom door for an hour in case she needed anything. That was the night she came home from the clinic. I made myself breathe in and breathe out. Then I opened the laptop again and kept reading. There was an address in one of the later emails. Ryan had written, "When's the housewarming? I want to see it." Diana's reply included the address of an apartment complex about 4 miles from our house. 3 months ago, she had made a down payment on a 1-bedroom unit. She had furnished it. She had a life running in parallel to ours, 4 miles away, and I had been sitting in our house not knowing any of it. I photographed every relevant email on my phone. Then I closed the laptop and put it back exactly where it had been, and I walked into the backyard and stood there in the dark for a long time. The next morning, I called Dennis and gave him Ryan's full name. By early afternoon, Dennis had confirmed what I already suspected. Ryan was married. His wife's name was Claire. They had been married for 9 years. Dennis found her workplace. She was an accounts manager at a logistics company downtown, and within 24 hours he had confirmed that she did not appear to know about the affair. I thought about what it would feel like to get a phone call from a stranger telling you that your marriage was a lie. I thought about how I would have wanted that call to go. Then I dialed her work number. She answered on the 3rd ring, professional and composed. I introduced myself and told her I had information about her husband that she needed to hear, and that I could prove everything I was about to say. There was a long silence. Then she said, quietly but firmly, that she would meet me. We met at a coffee shop on a Sunday morning, a place neutral enough that neither of us would feel cornered. I arrived first. When she walked in, I recognized her from the photo Dennis had pulled. A woman around my age, dark hair, a steadiness in the way she carried herself that reminded me of someone who had learned not to show when she was worried. She sat across from me and folded her hands on the table. "Before you start," she said, "I want you to know I've had my own suspicions. For about 6 months." She paused. I just didn't have proof. I placed the printed emails in front of her. I set my phone on the table and played 30 seconds of the voice recording. I showed her the hotel photographs Dennis had compiled. I watched her face as she went through it. She didn't cry. She went very still, the way water goes still before a storm, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were clear. "How long?" she asked. "At least 18 months that I can document," I said. "Probably longer." She nodded once, slowly, like she was confirming something she had already known in our bones. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm meeting with a divorce attorney Monday morning," I said. "I'd suggest you do the same." She looked at the emails again. Then she looked up. "There's something else I want to do first." That was the beginning of our plan. Claire knew something I didn't. Ryan's firm held a quarterly awards dinner for top-performing agents, and Diana was receiving a Regional Achievement Award at the upcoming event in 3 weeks. Ryan would be presenting it to her. The dinner was attended by the entire regional staff, their spouses, several clients, and senior leadership from the parent company. About 120 people in total. Claire had been planning to attend as Ryan's +1, as she did every year. "I'll still go," she said, with a calm that I found both impressive and slightly terrifying. "And I'd like you to come with me." I looked at her across the coffee shop table and I thought, I have been too passive for too long. "Tell me the rest of the plan," I said. We spent the next 2 weeks being methodical. Claire consulted a divorce attorney first, on the Mondays I had suggested. I met with mine the same day. Both attorneys advised us to document everything before making any moves, which we had already done. Mine was particularly interested in the hidden bank account. Under North Carolina law, the concealment of marital assets during what appeared to be a premeditated plan to exit the marriage carried significant implications for the divorce settlement. Diana's $240,000 was going to be a very uncomfortable conversation for her legal team. Claire, as it turned out, had her own financial discovery to make. A joint investment account Ryan managed had been systematically drained over 2 years, $40,000 or $50,000 redirected to places Claire had never been aware of. Payments toward Diana's apartment, as it turned out. Ryan had been co-funding the nest. We met 3 more times in those 2 weeks, always in public, always with purpose. The first time I noticed Claire was actually funny was during our second meeting when she described finding a cologne in Ryan's gym bag she had never bought him, and said, very dryly, "I thought he'd developed new taste in fragrance." Turns out I was half right. I laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly, and it felt strange to laugh, but it also felt like a sign that I was still capable of it. By the third meeting, we were less 2 people plotting and more 2 people who happened to have ended up in the same strange situation and were finding it easier to get through together. The night of the awards dinner arrived on a Thursday. I wore a dark navy suit I hadn't put on in 2 years. Claire met me in the lobby of the hotel, dressed in a dark green that worked very well for her, composed and unreadable. We walked in together and took seats at a table near the side of the room, away from where Ryan and Diana were seated with the senior partners. Diana spotted me from across the room and her expression shifted through 4 things in about 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, something close to alarm, and then a careful reconstruction of a smile as she looked away. I watched her lean toward Ryan and say something. He turned and found me, held eye contact for a moment, looked away. The dinner moved through its courses. The speeches started. Midway through the program, Ryan stepped up to the podium to present the regional award. He was smooth about it, easy in front of a room, the kind of man who'd been comfortable speaking publicly for years. He praised Diana's numbers, her client relationships, her dedication. Diana came up to receive her award. She took the plaque and turned to the microphone, and I could see from the set of her shoulders that she was working very hard to feel normal about the fact that her husband was sitting 20 feet away when he was not supposed to be here. "I just want to say," she began, smiling at the room, "this means so much." "It should," Claire said. She hadn't shouted it. She had simply said it, clearly and conversationally, from our table. The room went quiet in a way rooms go quiet when something real interrupts something rehearsed. Diana's smile froze. Ryan turned from the podium. Claire stood up. I had not known exactly what she was going to say. She had said she wanted to handle her part herself, and so I sat there and watched. "My name is Claire," she said to the room, "and I'm Ryan's wife. Or I was, as of Monday morning when I filed for divorce." She looked directly at Ryan. 18 months, Ryan, in our marriage. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. She picked up her clutch from the table. I just wanted to make sure your colleagues knew who they were applauding. She walked out. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning. Diana looked at me. I didn't say anything for a moment. I had already said what I needed to say, in the form of a certified letter delivered to her attorney that morning, initiating divorce proceedings and citing the concealment of marital assets as one of several grounds. She didn't know about the letter yet. She found out, from the expression on my face, that she was about to. I stood up. "Congratulations on the award," I said, and followed Claire out of the room. We stood in the lobby and Claire let out a slow breath that sounded like something she'd been holding for a long time. "How do you feel?" I asked. She thought about it. "Like I can breathe again?" she said. We walked out to the parking lot and stood in the cool October air for a while, not saying much, just settling into the quiet that follows something that needed to happen. The months that followed were not easy. Anyone who tells you divorce is simple when the other person deserves it has never actually been through one. There are still papers to sign, and accounts to untangle, and rooms in your house that feel wrong now. And mornings where you wake up and forget for one moment what happened before it all comes back. Diana hired an attorney. Her attorney was good. Mine was better, and the documentation of the hidden account gave me a position she couldn't argue away. The apartment she had purchased, still in her name alone, as it turned out, was treated as a marital asset she had acquired using diverted joint income. She kept the apartment. I kept the house. The settlement also awarded me a significant portion of what had been in that hidden account, which her lawyer tried very hard and very unsuccessfully to reframe as legitimate personal savings. Ryan was not fired immediately. These things take time in corporate environments, but the dinner had been attended by senior leadership from the parent company, and the detail that Ryan had been co-funding an employee's secret apartment using funds drained from his own household, which became part of the public divorce record, did not go unnoticed. He resigned 4 months after the dinner, before the company could formalize anything, and took a much smaller position at an independent agency in another city. Diana's production numbers fell sharply without his protection. Her license was flagged for an investigation into whether any of the financial irregularities touched client accounts. It was still ongoing when I stopped following the story. I did not take pleasure in any of that. I want to be honest about that. I had spent 11 years building a life with a woman I loved, and watching it dismantle itself was not satisfying. It was just necessary. There is a difference between justice and satisfaction, and most of the time you only get one. What I did take something from was the unlikely presence of Claire. We had exchanged numbers for practical reasons. Then we texted to check in on the legal process. Then one of us, I honestly don't remember who initiated it, suggested dinner. Not for any strategic purpose, just because we were both going through the same disorienting experience, and neither of us had anyone who fully understood it. Dinner was easy. Easier than I expected. She was sharp and direct and made me laugh more in 2 hours than I had in the last year of my marriage. She was also, I noticed, very careful. She did not rush toward anything. She had been lied to in a specific way, the kind that makes you want to be very sure before you trust again. And I understood that completely because I felt the same. We moved slowly. Coffee became dinner, became walks, became a Sunday afternoon drive just outside the city where we parked near a reservoir and talked until it got dark. At no point did either of us pretend it was something other than what it was. At some point it became something. I'm not going to tell you that I found my person and everything reset to factory defaults and the pain became irrelevant. That would be dishonest. I still have nights where I replay 11 years and try to find the moments where I should have seen it sooner. I still have moments where I wonder what I could have done differently. But here is what I have learned. You can spend your life auditing the past for errors, or you can put your energy into building something that doesn't need to be debugged. It was a Saturday morning in March, about 7 months after the awards dinner, and Claire and I were making breakfast in my kitchen. Her making it mostly, because she is genuinely gifted at it in a way that I am not. When she set a plate in front of me and sat down across the table and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. My first instinct was the old instinct, the one trained by 11 years of a marriage I thought was different from what it was. Something protective and braced moved through me. Then I looked at her face more carefully, and I saw that whatever this was not bad news. It was news that scared her, but not in the way of something wrong. "Okay," I said. She slid something across the table. I looked down at it. I looked back up at her. "I've taken 4, she said. They all say the same thing. I don't have a precise memory of what I said in the next 60 seconds. I know I came around the table. I know she laughed when I picked her up, which I'm not sure I had ever done before, and I know the laugh turned into something else. That complicated mixture of joy and disbelief and relief that only happens when something you had quietly stopped hoping for turns out to still be possible. We sat on the back porch later that morning with coffee, not saying much, watching the yard. She was quiet for a while and then she said, "I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it." "You weren't sure how I'd feel about it?" I repeated. She smiled. "It's a lot." "Claire," I said. "I spent a decade being told I couldn't have a family by someone who had just decided she didn't want one. This is not a lot. This is the thing I didn't let myself want anymore because wanting it hurt." I looked at her. "This is what I actually want." She was quiet again for a moment. "Me too," she finally said. "More than I expected." I had a ring by the following weekend, not because I was moving fast for the sake of it, but because I had spent enough time in my life moving carefully toward things that were already gone, and I knew what this was. I didn't make a speech about it. We were at a restaurant we'd been to twice before, nothing elaborate, and I just put the box on the table in the middle of dinner and pushed it toward her and said, "I'd really like to do this right." She looked at the box. Then she looked at me. Then she said, "You are doing it right. That's the whole point." She said yes. My son was born the following October, a Friday morning, 8 pounds and extremely opinionated about it. Claire brought him home to the house in Charlotte, the same house I had nearly lost to the wreckage of a different life, which I had spent several months quietly making into something that felt like it belonged to the present rather than the past. New furniture. New bedroom. A small room painted a soft yellow-green that I had spent more time choosing than I had spent on any single work project in the previous 5 years. There are things I look back on now and understand differently. The years where I was too quiet, too accommodating, too willing to explain away the distance between us. I understand now that love is not passive, not the sustained, daily kind. It requires you to say something when something is wrong. It requires you to trust your own observations. It requires you to respect yourself enough to know that certain things are not something you should accept, and that walking away from something broken is not failure. It is the only honest thing left to do. Diana moved to Raleigh after the divorce. I heard through someone who knew someone that she and Ryan had lasted another 4 months after the dinner before ending badly. In the way things end when they're built on the wrong foundation from the start. I didn't feel much when I heard that. I hope she figured out eventually what she actually wanted from her life, and I hope she was honest about it. That was all I had left for her. Some nights I sit on the back porch with a cup of coffee after my son is asleep, and I think about the version of myself that was still in that marriage 2 years ago, making excuses, carrying things that were too heavy, and calling the weight normal. I feel something close to kindness for that person. He was trying. He just hadn't learned yet that trying is not the same as thriving, and that the right kind of life doesn't require you to disappear into it to hold it together. The right kind of life, I have found, is the kind where someone is still up when you come downstairs at midnight. Where breakfast gets made and the person making it looks up when you walk in. Where you are not managed or handled or placated, but simply known. I have that now. I am still learning how to let it be enough, and then learning that it is more than enough. It is more than I thought I was going to have. And that, I think, is the whole point.